Good afternoon. My name is Tam Nguyen. I'm with LA Metro Office of Extraordinary Innovation. And today we're joined by four panelists. The fifth one is going to be joining us soon. And this panel discussion is about transit agencies as disruptors and how transit systems are changing communities. Many transit agencies are working with their local partners to proactively transform and reshape their communities. And in so doing, they are also becoming disruptors themselves. And so we have transit leaders here who will be sharing their vision for positioning their agencies as change agents. And so we will be leaving room at the end of this session for questions and answers. And so if you have any burning questions as the discussion is underway, hang on to them, and we'll definitely try to get to it at the end of the session. And thank you so much for joining us today. So joining us on the panel is Doug Kelsey, who's the General Manager of Tri-County Metropolitan Transportation District of Oregon, in Portland, Oregon. Laura Koprowski, who is Vice President of Government Affairs, Marketing and Communications at Central Ohio Transit Authority in Columbus, Ohio. And then next to Laura is Ed Benning, who's the General Manager, CEO of Mass Transportation Authority in Flint, Michigan. And then also joining us as well is Carrie Butler, General Manager of LexTran in Lexington, Kentucky. And we have a fifth panelist who is on her way. Her flight was delayed, but she will be joining us any moment now. And that will be Catherine Kellerman, Chief Executive Officer of Port Authority of Allegheny County, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And so as the moderator of this session, I get to ask the first few questions. And so that will hopefully lay the framework for the conversation to follow. So I'll start with, there are many challenges to meeting the mobility needs and expectations of the public in an increasingly complex transportation system. Technology innovations are further changing that mobility landscape. And so what opportunities are there for transit agencies to play a different role than what they may have played in the past to achieve the desired mobility outcomes? So this is talking about transit agencies as within their sphere of influence. What are the things that they directly control versus support and influence, and how do they leverage those opportunities to really influence mobility? So how about we start first with Ed?
Yes, well, we as an organization probably follow what we just heard at lunch. And that is that we decided to get out of our lane. And by getting out of our lane, we took the traditional model of bus and paratransit, and we said there must be another way to provide on-demand services. So we as an organization have been going through a transformation, and in that transformation, we're providing a number of new specialized services. And some of you have heard me say it, but we're like the public Uber. And we operate 80 cars, and we provide service for medical trips and other things that go beyond our normal services. And so we have embraced the fact that we can no longer live with the services we have. We must provide new, innovative mobility on-demand services.
And then, Doug, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think in Portland, Oregon, we're going through, actually, the timing on this is quite interesting because we're taking our board of directors through the discussion that actually started this morning around how do you succeed as I'll call bus, rail, paratransit agency, or do we need to expand our palette, which I believe we need to. We need to become an integrator of services, not just a provider, because it's too old, if all you have is a hammer, everything will look like a nail is the solution. My past background, I was leading the agency in Vancouver, BC that was referenced earlier, where we had roads and bridges. So we're even having discussions around as you get to congestion pricing, so not looking at mobility in its totality, not even just transit. So whether it's from scooters to walking to cycling, all the way up to if you get to congestion pricing, I've asked our folks at the state level, make sure you include smart cards in your technology for transit, so you can get to loyalty programs of road use as well. So we really have to integrate all mobility, not just believers we may have primary responsibility for, but you have a secondary role of integration and influence to shape ultimate outcome behaviors that the customer should be able to make good choices on. I would perhaps parallel this to, we need a cultural change to build on all the good work that's been done, but it's very similar to me to what happened in the recycling industry many, many years ago. We almost wouldn't consider not recycling now. Everybody, every single household considers recycling of some form or fashion. We don't have that culture. If you look in Europe and other places, they have that culture. And I think it's reflected in the differences, and probably around this room, of all fundamental modal shares. Their modal shares in Europe, you look at Vienna, 39%, ours, 4%. So there's a culture that is an underpinning, I believe, that is with the disruption culture is a great opportunity for a new outcome and a new conversation, which technology is the enabler of.
Thank you. Carrie, do you want to jump in?
Sure, I think that's a great point you just made, and we had a discussion with some folks at our Metropolitan Planning Organization last week talking about people used to smoke in the workplace. And even in my career, I remember when people smoked at work. I mean, in the office that I eventually had, somebody used to smoke there. So some of what we talk about that can seem far afield right now, will happen. And I think one day we'll look back and be like, why do we ever even drive our own cars or drive our own buses? So, this innovation and disruption can feel weird and different at first, but I think it is important and valuable for the industry. And I guess to your question, one thought I had is maybe not as exciting or sort of glamorous as the shared modes and the different sort of innovative topics, but where we have worked to be plugged in with different agencies in our government. So whether it is something dealing with the opioid crisis or people who are experiencing homelessness, is how can we partner with the different agencies that maybe impact our service or don't impact our service, but impact the community so that the agency can be seen as, a player and a, part of the community, to improve the quality of life.
So change is hard, as we know. Most likely the individuals and communities' vision of the future will be constrained and informed by what they know from the past. So how do you help communities reimagine a different future when all their reference point is about what they know from the past? What is the role of disruption in helping transit agencies adapt and stay nimble in the face of change and adapting to the mobility needs of the customer? So how about we start with Laura?
Starting off real quick, before I entered the ballroom, I was just taking a quick call with my husband, and he said, "Oh, what are you going to talk about?" And I mentioned disruption, and he said, "What a negative, awful word. Why is that the name of your title, of your session?" And I just stopped. I was like, well, we're just saying it like all morning. I didn't even think that it was negative. And so just to even, as we're talking about how quickly things are changing, I think that disruption, while it does have this kind of negative, scary tone, I mean, just look through the course of the morning, and as we've talked about all the creativity and all the innovation, I mean, at this point in my day, I don't feel like that is a scary or a negative word. And so to take that and kind of lead into what is going on with CODA and in Columbus, Ohio, we've had a pretty traditional concept of our downtown. I mean, growing, a lot is happening. But the concept is, the majority of people drive their cars to downtown and you park, and then you drive home. And as long as that model was working okay, everything was fine. I mean, CODA certainly provided an option for people to get to work, but we were a minimal percentage of that amount, probably 4% or less. And then all of a sudden, something really started to change. We have over 10,000 people who are living in downtown, and that's putting pressure on where people park. And we also have a lot of development, a lot of cranes in the air, in the skylines, which is fantastic. And so the developers are starting to think, I'd rather build offices and build more apartments and condos and not parking garages. garages. And then this whole concept of how long is the individual parking space that goes with the condo and the apartment. I mean, how viable is that? So we have had a real culture shift with looking at our downtown and in the land use and said, you know, we just don't want to continue in parking garages. And the issue is also presented with people, you know, can you recruit workers? Can you lease the space? I mean, all of this is suddenly a disruption, and positives and negatives. So our Downtown Special Improvement District approached CODA and said, our members are willing to tax themselves. They are willing to pass an assessment so that they can give their employees a free CODA pass. What do you think about that? And we were just like, wow, that is incredible. That is so creative. And we loved it because it was 45,000 workers. It was going to be suddenly a tool and a key for people who work in the hotels, cleaning the hotels, all the way up to lawyers, government workers. It was just it was going to be this equalizer of transportation and opportunity. And you know, we didn't stop there. We couldn't stop there because even though they passed an assessment for themselves, there was still a gap of funding. And so we reached out to our Metropolitan Planning Organization, and they were just an incredible partner coming forward with additional seed money. They also, because our Downtown Special Improvement District is a very creative, nimble shop, but only of about 5-6 employees, they were a little overwhelmed with administering a program like that. So again, you know, through partnerships, we came together how to make that work. So this kicked off in June with a lot of attention, a lot of excitement, a lot of nervousness, and we're really happy to say at this point we have over 13,000 commuters, downtown workers signed up out of 45,000. I mean, that is just to us to have, you know, you think about it, over a 30% engagement rate and interest in this program. We have nearly 400 businesses signed up and major corporations housed in downtown Columbus, Huntington Bank, Nationwide Insurance. So we're really excited. And again, back to kind of, you know, collect all that, and the bottom line is that, you know, we're looking at our downtown in a very different way. This is where transit can really play a more active role in how you decide to develop your community, land use, business, and be an economic driver. Now businesses are reaching out to us. They may be in the suburbs. They may be just out of downtown and saying, could you please create Columbus CPATS 2.0 for us? So we're really excited about that.
Thank you. Ed, do you want to?
Yes, in our community, one of the things that was really important was to do a needs assessment. We reached out to partners throughout the community and basically brought them to the table, and we asked, what are the gap services that exist today, and how do we get at those services? And fully understanding that rides to medical, rides to work, many of the needs that existed in the community were not being addressed in a manner that moved people to medical appointments. We found out in many cases that 40 to 70% of the people today either cancel or no-show for a doctor's office call. And when we came to the table, with one thing in mind, is that nothing about us without us. We're going to be involved at every level. And I often say you're at the table or on the menu. So you're either there or they'll cut you down. And so, at any rate, we found that to be very efficient for us and very effective because we develop partners. And I would not want to in any way suggest the work we're doing today that there's shedding taking place. We're actually being paid for a very sustainable platform that allows us to be a medical transportation provider that's fully paid for. And in our community, and I've been in this business going on, well, not quite 40 years, but it's getting close. For years and years and years, people looked at us as, oh, you're the bus service. When I walk in the room, you're the bus guy. We now, in our community, absolutely love us. They say, you're the answer to my mother, my grandmother, my wife, my neighbor. I had a businessman tell me that I retired. You know what I do? I provide medical transportation to the whole family every day of the week. And all of a sudden, we become so relevant that people believed in what we were doing. And for the first time, And all the time I've been there, people recognize this as being something more than just the bus going up and down the street. And the bus going up and down the street is very important. But for years and years and years, we expected people to come to the bus. Today, we have to go to them and get demand services that better address the need. And that's what we're doing with our Rides to Wellness. And on our regional transportation, we've grown our service today where we're nearly 10,000 riders a week now, fully paid for by employers. And those are all partnerships. And that comes from the outreach. At the same time, obviously, we have to take a lot of chances. And at the same time, we have many new great partners.
I do have a follow-up question regarding the outreach and the partnership. How did you begin to start that outreach process? What kinds of mechanisms did you use to engage with those partners?
On the medical side, we talked to the Department of Health and Human Services, and we said, what services do you need that are unaddressed? And they said, there are gap services that we need, we'd be willing to pay you for, and pay you at a rate which is sustainable. And so we said, in 2015, we said, okay, we'll provide that service. And we did, and they started out giving us about $500,000 a year. They asked us in 2016 to do same-day service. My staff almost had a croak, but I said, we'll do that. And we'll do it within 30 minutes. And then most of them did think I fell off the cliff somewhere, but we said, we'll do it, that's our goal. And they say, we'll fund that, we'll pay for that. And so today we provide same-day service. We don't always do 30 minutes, but it's all about meeting gap service. What we found is that when you let the community know that you're a game player, you're willing to work with them on unmet needs, you'll find there are so many partners today. We have them coming to us every week. We'll have someone coming, and they're bringing money. And so that's kind of how we addressed it, is what do you need? How can we do it? And I'll leave you with a real quick thing that happened. One day, staff came and said, well, they're now asking us to transport babies in car seats. And so I said, well, what's that problem? They said, are we going to do that? I said, right after we get car seats, get the car seats. And so we started doing, well, today we transport about 1,500 babies a month. And in pre-approved car seats that are washed every week, drivers are specially trained, but it just shows you how if you step out of your lane, you can do some really interesting things. The parents put them in the car seat, but we transport them.
Thank you.
That's great.
Carrie?
Sure. So one of the biggest disruptions that we had, or innovations, was taking electric vehicles into our fleet. And this was done, in part, I think, because of the experience that our board and that other leadership had had at conferences such as this. So I think this is a key piece of sharing information that's important for transit agencies to know. But it was not necessarily I don't know that it was the most popular decision. There was some resistance, and Kentucky is not, I'm born and raised in Kentucky, I'm very proud of where I'm from, but we're not necessarily known in the same ilk of progression as maybe a San Francisco or a Portland. So to go to a sustainable sort of, or looking to sustainability as an energy platform or energy source was like, well, why? Like, what are you doing? And so that was different. And it was funny to come to conferences and hear people like championing it. And California's going, transit fleets 100% 2040. I was like, it's real different. It's real different for us in Kentucky, and especially in a smaller, maybe a little bit more rural community, or closer to some of the rural communities. So it can be a challenge, and I kind of echo your sentiment of sometimes when you tell staff, or we're doing this, and that you get a look like, no, we're not. Like, yeah, we are. We're doing this. We're going to make it work. But, education, helping employees feel comfortable, training, kind of those nuts and bolts of employee communication and internal stuff is important. And then, communicating the successes and being honest with failures with the community, I think, is important too, as far as like how you can make it happen. But I definitely enjoy coming to conferences or events to hear what other people are doing, but it can be very different when you're in a smaller or different, you kind of feel like not the outsider, but there's so many different things, bigger things happening in bigger cities, and some of what needs to happen for transit in the smaller, medium-sized can be a little different, or some of it is more education and experience so that people know, like, okay, just because in the past everybody drove to work and everybody was on the expressway doesn't mean that that's how it always has to be.
Thank you. So from the viewpoint of the community, do they necessarily see transforming and shaping communities as a positive thing? How do transit agencies add value while addressing the negative externalities that comes with running services or with the transportation landscape? So for example, there could be concerns about displacement. Residents who live in that area may feel that they may not be able to benefit from the transit improvements that occur because they'll be priced out of their communities. And the list goes on in terms of those negative externalities. And so as transit providers, now looking at just not only operating transit, but also looking at all of the different ways that life intersects with transportation. And so can you talk more about that? Start with Doug.
Sure. This is a very complex topic in my mind. I think there's a lot of work that's been done. I do think the standard of responsibility for agencies such as we have in TriMet in Portland, Oregon, have gone up. We used to have small tables around the community who kind of led the regions. Well, they've got tables not of 10 anymore, tables of 800. And our constituents demand and expect access to us all. So we've, in fact, I just reorganized my company, the biggest one in 25 years, about 2 weeks ago, just based on this exact topic. That we need to be more accessible to the community on their terms, not on our terms. And I believe that starts on daily service in the ways that the community needs access to us. And all the way through to, we're working on a $2.4 billion rail line project right now that not only is it's I think gentrification will occur at times if we don't apply a specific muscle to it. I do think it's a trained muscle. I do believe it can be done. It needs to be put into internal government agreements. We've just done that, that we are going to commit to building about 1,000 homes that go with it. But don't just ask us municipal partners and county partners to take the haircut on the real estate. How are you going to let us go up? So in it is the profitability through transit-oriented development. How do you synergize all of it? So follow the money. But if you ask the government agency to just take the haircut financially, I go, that's not fair. You're going to have to release some of your zoning that you historically protected to allow us to create more financial oxygen that we can in fact afford to balance and include inclusion here. So we don't have gentrification, but let's allow good living, and all boats will rise if a good community has a good transit-oriented development around it, and including land assembly and such. In fact, part of my reorganization, I just formed a TOD division. Specifically to deal with this. I said we've got to put our money where our mouth is. We have to become more commercially savvy, not just stewards of transacting real estate anymore. We need to liberate the real estate we've been given. And government and municipal partners have a role in this. So I very much am of the belief that transit authorities or transportation authorities have a foundational role in doing their part, but not overly carrying the burden on behalf of all the other municipalities. They'll use these big projects to extract every ounce of blood they can if we don't have a balanced relationship. So I think balance is the key here on all parts, including the equity piece is really foundational. I should also add that I've also been talking, in fact, I met with all the mayors in the region just before I came here on Monday, and said our agency needs to become 100% transit accessible. Let's talk about equity. Those who can't even get on a transit facility, that's part of equity to me. And when I was in Vancouver running the Olympic Games up there, it was the first transit agency in history of any Olympic Games to be 100% transit accessible. And I said, you can do it, Portland is going to do it, and we need the mayors to play, so don't just put a bus stop down where there's grass. That's not fair.
Thank you. Laura?
Well, I think I'm thinking of kind of tale of two cities in Columbus, so I'll start with one, which is the Linden neighborhood, and that's a really it's a neighborhood that hasn't enjoyed the success of the rest of the region. 42% of the families in this neighborhood of 18,000 residents live in poverty. The median income, family income is $24,000 or less. And what's really sobering is that they also have an average of living 7 years less than an average Columbus resident. So it's a hard life in this neighborhood. But CODA, along with the city of Columbus, has decided, transportation and a number of other investments with safety, with housing, access to education and jobs. This neighborhood deserves more and deserves better, and we can make that happen. So the Linden neighborhood was very intentional for us to be a piece and a part and really the heart of our first bus rapid transit line in the Columbus area, CMAX. Thought, what a wonderful, way to bridge downtown, go through the Linden neighborhood up to a very successful suburban area, Westerville. But when we talked to the community, they didn't initially see that. In fact, the way they perceived it was, oh, you just want to rush people through our neighborhood as fast as possible, get them from Westerville to downtown. And they just could not understand or really honestly trust us and believe in us that no, we intentionally have chosen this area of the city because we want to be a part of the transformation that we believe can occur in your neighborhood. And so we had to spend, and we continue to need to spend a lot of time in this neighborhood. When we launched the BRT service, of course we did advertising, we had the press conference, but we actually did a community day at their STEM grade school. And we did a Saturday, we made sure we had lunch and we had all kinds of activities and fun because we wanted to be there and really show them that this is a new asset for your community. Also, the BRT stops incorporate artwork and history from their neighborhoods, and we engaged them and we worked with their neighborhood commission. And what I can tell you is that the ridership now, we're coming up on a year, it has been very successful. We have over 20% growth in that area. Yes, we have people from Westerville using the service, but I would tell you, riding it regularly myself, it is the residents from the Linden neighborhood that are using the service. So then the second city to tell you about is the Short North area in the Columbus. And this is a very thriving arts district. If you ever come to Columbus, it's probably, you would stay downtown and you would go up there and you would enjoy the many restaurants and boutiques and art galleries. And it's become extremely dense and high-rise apartments. And we've been there all along the way growing with them. Our highest ridership on High Street. And they have been just inundated with development, and I would say kind of not sure that they want transit anymore. Or, could you be there, but could you be off this way? Could you move your stop there? Oh, we don't want covered bus stops. Oh my gosh, no. And so once, here we are telling new tenants to the area, and it can be everything from a restaurant to a salon to, any business, you name it, and trying to explain and bring them along to the benefits of what public transportation means. Oftentimes I'm finding out they just assume that their employees are going to
Same day service. Somebody's calling you for same day service.
I drive some days.
So sound like another baby.
Yeah.
That's it.
But that their employees are going to park for free on a street, on a side street, and that is going away. And so we just, once again, we have to talk very personal it's just person to person. In fact, myself and our chief development officer just having to sit down at times with some of the business owners and explain to them and kind of negotiate. I will say negotiate what we're going to do. So, they come around when you start talking about, why do you choose a certain area? What are the benefits of a bus shelter? And what could we do? So once again, we're investigating art in the shelters, but it's always sobering and a reminder that, a couple things, that they don't initially think that the people riding the bus are connected to them. Oftentimes they bring you kind of the worst situation that's occurred that deals with security, that deals with trash. And I think that we have to absolutely, while we think about things like, real-time bus, on demand, you can't ever forget just the pure basics of good service, right? Feeling safe, feeling that when you go up to a bus stop or wait in a bus shelter, it's clean. And then, really the third is that working with them. So we have said for too long and too often, the customer is the person on the bus. And now we are saying the other customer is that business person, is that employer. You are our customer. What do we need to do to work with you to have you part of embracing CODA and public transportation?
Thank you. So you've all talked about the work that you're doing to really serve as change agents in your communities, and now to reflect back on positioning your own organization for success to deliver the best mobility outcome to the public. Transit agency and its workforce must be positioned for success. So how do you help your workforce deal with change and adapt and position yourself for success? Can you talk about that? And let's start with Carrie.
Sure. So I think one of the biggest disruptions, and it's happening now, and I think it will get probably worse before it gets better, is with the workforce development, specifically maintenance staff, mechanics, maintenance technicians, as well as drivers. So you might argue that, well, in 20 years, autonomous vehicles, you won't need drivers, training them for a different set of skills. But really, in the maintenance world, there will still be vehicles to maintain to some degree. And I brought up the electric vehicles. There's not a bevy of electric vehicle trained maintenance technicians out there. We had a mechanic who was going to take a job here in DC to make $110,000. If you're from Kentucky, $110,000 is a lot of money. May not be at the highest level here in DC, but that's still a good job. So I think that is a critical piece of what we need to do as an industry and how we can prepare for change that will happen, because that base workforce, whether it's maintenance technicians or whether it's how drivers evolve into a different role, whether it's autonomous vehicles and they're more dispatchers or they're more fare collector or customer service agents, all that is a key piece of how we can manage it. And it sort of starts with the basics at the employee level.
Thank you. And Catherine, welcome. Thanks for being on. Do you want to jump in on this one?
I'll pass. Thank you.
Ed?
In the Flint community, there are many challenges. I'm looking at the water here, and we're known nationally for water. But can you imagine getting up in the morning and using a bottle of water to brush your teeth, or a filter to be able to take a shower, and then being told the filter's not taking care of it? And so our community at one time had over 200,000 residents. Today it has 90,000. People are aging in place, and people's expectation of us as an organization are changing. And so in our organization, alignment's been very important. We had to align all of our employees, our board, the community, to understand that we want to make sure that we address every need that exists as much as possible. And so we had to change our whole paradigm on addressing needs in the community. But we had to recognize that you have these brokers running all over the state and in our community providing transportation that may or may not be good. And when it fails, they look at us because we're receiving a millage in the community. In fact, we have 4 millages, 1 in the city, 3 in the county. And we just passed the millage by over 70%. But we were able to do that because people understood that we were directing our services at the needs. But at the same time, we always make sure that we have as much alignment as possible. And that started with every employee in the organization, right down to the mechanic, to the custodian, all the way up to the driver on the street, that person delivering the service. And, our position has been, let's create a situation where we exceed customers' expectations. We do things they did not expect that we would do. We've been able to achieve that because we understood what the needs were in the community. And as we become aware, we better address, we take a second look to say, how can we best meet that need? And just give you an idea, last week, we had a press conference. We're providing the new veteran service, same-day service for veterans throughout our community. The service is free to veterans. It is same day. We take them to medical, prescription, shopping, personal trips for their spouses. We take them 40 miles to the north, 40 miles to the south, to hospitals, same day, on demand. It's all fully paid for by our County Board of Commissioners. And then soon we'll have a second phase that will move into 2 other counties. But the issue is, we have these veterans living among us that are so underserved and struggle. And those are needs that kind of perk up from the community. And so as we're out looking, we look at how can we better address some of those needs and then find a mechanism to allow us to align our services to address it.
Thank you. Catherine, is there anything that you want to?
On the next one.
Okay.
So I do apologize. It was apparently really windy at Dulles. And then who knew about this whole Christmas tree lighting thing?
Oh, gosh.
So it was a little challenging to get here, so I apologize.
But you're here.
Well, we're glad you're here.
Thank you.
And so we're actually going to open it up for folks in the audience to ask questions or even answer some of the questions that I threw out there as well, if you're interested in sharing your experience as disruptors in your communities. So we have microphones on both. I think we have 2 microphones. If anyone wants to chime in and be part of the conversation.
Hi, Mark Donaghy from Dayton, Ohio. I'd like to hear some of your experiences in dealing with, say, your governing boards and dealing with these new ideas and concepts, and also maybe your senior employees who are probably real transit traditionalists and who like everything to be in straight lines, with headways and all that. So if you give us a little, especially on the governing boards, it'd be real interesting to hear about that.
I will, well, go ahead.
No,
go ahead.
Sure, okay.
I'm going to go if y'all don't go.
I think this actually ties in a bit to the other conversation that the question was just asked in my mind. Is part of it is you can't forget governance as part of internal communications. Because if your governance structure is not on side, then you may be misaligned for political or other reasons that may be lurking that you don't understand. Excuse me. So for example, I am literally taking our board right now through, I've set up multiple strategy sessions that are not about the daily business now with our board of directors. The sessions, doing extra board meetings in the public, cameras rolling, the whole bit, just on education and strategy, not about tactics of the business or transacting the business at hand, which is all important. So we just finished a session 2 weeks ago on the strategy of mobility. Coming up in March, I've got one on loyalty programs, not about transit loyalty programs, but actually around lifestyle loyalty programs, which are very different. I did this in the private sector, and we got a 5% market share increase with 0 capital. So it's how do you bring those into, because typically loyalty programs in transit are a discount. That's usually what it translates into. So how do you do it without that? So using this to bridge together how you get mobility, and the keynote speaker this morning spoke to, how do you get loyalty with mobility? I think that's going to be crucial beyond just going to and from. So I think governance is a really crucial piece. As management changes over, so do boards by design. A good governance structure should have that. And so it never ends. And so you've got to keep educating yourself and the board and trying to bring the team along with you to the degree that the spectrum of ideology allows. But you can't forget the basics of the business that was referred to. Till you get to the new place, you can't ignore your responsibilities of that's current, because you'll do so at your own peril. So to the mechanic on the floor, they're going, do you want me to fix this wheel or not? You can get all fancy at the vision, mission, and values. They're going, do you want the light bulb fixed or not? And that's important. So leaders, I believe, have to be really crucial at talking not only at the governance level, but all the way down to ground zero to that mechanic, she or he, was really important to fixing the problem of the day. And so it's bringing everybody along, but having governance, having your back, because the more courageous you are, the more vulnerable you are to the spectrum of society that's out there, particularly when you spend public dollars.
So, so since I see some of my former board members here, Mr. Melendez and Councilwoman, I'll say, of course, it was a wonderful board. There you go. I think my experience was more that you would have a board that was wanting you to do very progressive, forward-thinking things, and I had less experience of a board saying, whoa, 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 slow down, and more of an experience of a board saying, why can't we do these things? And there's a lot of folks up there, that can talk about working with different styles of boards. I think the big comment, though, was what about that person who's been there 28 years and they don't, what needs to get done to them is not what you need to get done. And it goes back to the first point here, that alignment of how much time you're spending out on the floor and talking to people and doing the vision thing that folks can get into and folks can buy into. So I'm at an agency now that's been running transit off and on for 150 years. And if Paul Skatelis is around, Paul was the last time the agency really had strong branding and a vision and going out there. And using social media has been a great platform because I have a bunch of followers who have 3 followers. They're employees, and social media is a way that we can talk back and forth. And the more that we're out there talking about the vision of where Pittsburgh is going to be, what's transportation going to look like, employees will get on board with that and say, I had no idea we had something to be excellent. I had no idea we should be proud, and they carry that with them. It's not an easy thing. It's, I was at 3 operating locations on Thanksgiving before we drove to my in-laws, but those were conversations I couldn't replace. But I think, we love the in-laws, right, but still. I think getting those folks to line up and have a sense of why fixing that wheel is tying into that bigger vision is probably more challenging and a thing that we overlook more.
I just want to jump in terms of, thinking about your younger employees and how you're engaging them. So I think we were very traditional for a while at CODA, thinking any new task force, any new service should be led by someone senior level. And our new president CEO, Joanna Pinkerton, said, I want us to form a task force, employee task force, to deal with mobility as a service. And I want a small group and no directors, no chiefs. This is the opportunity for our young professionals to be engaged. And I can tell you they are thrilled. First of all, this is like just, wow, it's like winning a trophy to be able to be on this working group. And, why not? This is the future, and they're the ones who are going to be here. They're excited about it. It's cross-functional. So we're carrying that through in other efforts as well. It's like, let's not always think about that the director or the person with the most seniority has to lead a project. Let's start giving opportunities to our younger staff, the up-and-comers, the people that we want to keep with us. So we're translating that also into sending them to, really meaningful conferences. For instance, one of our leads, kind of senior IT technicians, we let him go to the ITS International Conference overseas. He was just blown away that he got that opportunity, and just the energy and ideas that come back are really to our benefit, actually. We're the ones in the end that benefit.
And then Carrie, did you want to?
Oh, no, I don't think anything that I wasn't said. You all put it wonderfully.
So I'll add the LA Metro perspective, which is that we have an office that is dedicated to supporting disruption called the Office of Extraordinary Innovation. And on a good day, we're extraordinary. On other days, we're just considered extremely irritating to our colleagues. But ultimately, the office is to recognize that, innovation, disruption, whatever you want to call it, it's in addition to your full-time job. You have to do that additional work to actually bring about change and bring about and adapt and be nimble to the work that an agency does. And so we were tasked with 2 major functions, which one is to open our doors to all of the great ideas that are out there from the private sector. And so we did that through an unsolicited proposal process, and so that when people have a way to actually come to us with a good information about how to do things better, quicker, smarter, then now there's a process for them to be able to do that. And the other is strategic planning, and going back to, from tactics to vision, looking at, well, what is it that we're trying to do as an organization? We have a lot of projects that we have underway, but what is it actually doing? What is the ultimate outcome that we want? And how do we communicate that to our board so that everyone's on the same page in terms of what is the unifying outcome that we want? And to make sure that, at an agency of over 10,000 people, multiple departments, that we're all working towards that unified purpose from our frontline staff all the way to our governing board. And so our board just passed our 10-year strategic plan where it does lay out something like that, and we are going to start using it as a tool to be able to communicate at all levels of the organization and start to put a budget around that to make sure that it doesn't sit on a shelf collecting dust, but that we're actually putting it to work.
Can I just maybe add on to something you prompted me? And I'm going to go back many years ago, before I had gray hair and dinosaurs roamed the earth, that I used to work for Shell Oil. And we used to have a very crass term. It's called eat your young. And it was really, it was innovate. And this was 30 years ago. So this wasn't, innovation is not a new word that we're all looking up on Wikipedia. This has been going on for a lot of years. But in public transit, we've not had to compete because we've had power of government, and we still do to many fronts. Well, so did the taxi industry. In fact, it's a canary in the coal mine to me in some forms where the Ubers and Lyfts are eating their lunch in a regulated environment, and they're having to adapt. In the oil industry, we had to, we never had a department. It would be because if you don't, somebody else is going to and knock you out. And so I think part of our industry evolution as government agencies is that we're having to compete now, folks. We're having to innovate, and it should be everywhere. It's just the way it's in French, the raison d'etre. It's just your reason for being is just embedded in the DNA. That don't ask someone in my role to innovate what a mechanic can do, because they know the job better than I ever will. But everyone is expected to innovate, to be relevant, because it's actually fun. But innovate to be great. Not just innovate to go explore and get distracted, that's kind of fun, but innovate to stay healthy as a department, as a person, as a company. So I do believe we are, as we work with our last mile partners, that I call it a pirate's life. Sometimes you attack the ship together, and sometimes you attack each other. And just like the rail industry do, sometimes they will work together really tightly in a great, powerful lobby group, and sometimes they will compete against each other ferociously. So I do believe our industry is seeing competitive alternatives that sometimes we're not wanting to talk about as much. So sometimes we need to partner, sometimes we need to leverage and play together, but we also need to compete. And I think innovation is a sign of health in a company, culturally. If one's waiting for someone else to innovate, then I'd say we have a lot of work to do.
And this gentleman's been waiting a while to ask this question.
Okay, my name is John McAlister. I'm with the Santa Clara County Valley Transportation Authority. Some people call it Silicon Valley. So our definition of disruptor may be a little different than some of yours. Ours might be a little more extreme. So I have a question here's what I think is considered a little bit disruptive. Scenario, 18 years ago, you passed a bond issue to build the light rail. In that 18 years, technology has changed. The area that the light rail was to go has not developed like you would have thought, and the workforce or the labor for the job centers are in a different part of the county. We're going to try to go in there and to ask the voters to say, no, we do not want to honor that bond issue of what we're going to build because it doesn't make sense, it's not relative in today's day and with the transportation system. We want to build a different system. Have you guys ever had an experience like that where you had to get your board to come up with a political will to say, what we voted for 18 years ago doesn't make sense now?
Yes. Can I leave it there? No. Yes, I've had experience actually in Vancouver, BC with that, where in fact, we were one technology, light rail over automated light rail technology. there was a commitment to go LRT when in fact it was to become ALRT. And so, yeah, that's hard. In fact, there's a double down on this one because in fact the line that was promised to the municipality that the whole region had signed up to was actually trumped by the Olympic Games building an airport line. So they actually, not only the technology changed, they got bumped in the priority of the large capital projects of the region. So it was doubly painful. But we always tried to come, a lot of these things have extreme politics in them. And you just pick which side of the sword you want to get stabbed on. But it's coming. But ultimately, I found as a leader, you have to have the courage to stand the test of what's the right thing to do. And hopefully that will prevail in the end.
From a bus-only authority, we had a situation like that where created in 1972, and we just kept growing and creating new lines off of that skeleton or that original framework. And a few years ago, we had to say that just doesn't work for our community. We're not getting enough people to the jobs where they need to go, and we're not connected and close to enough of our population. So we did a transit system redesign. We just, clear new map, clear new piece of paper. And actually, it was a month after I arrived at CODA where we launched the service, and it was scary, it was frightening for a lot of people, and I can tell you now, a year and a half later, our ridership is growing and is up. We've had months where we have had 10% ridership increase from the year before, and we're continuing now, moving into just finishing up October and November, where we're still upwards of 6-7% ridership growth the last month. So it's tough to do that. But when it's the right thing to do, the outcomes will absolutely reinforce that.
My question is going to be regarding how we get our arms around all of the innovation going on around the country. And I'm going to cite 6 or 7 buckets here. So please listen to them because I want to ask at the end if the list is complete and what else we might add. So, okay, when summarizing innovation happening around the country, I'm thinking many transit systems have creative partnerships with TNCs. I'm going to cite that as number 1. Second one, Laura, you just mentioned the reimagining bus routes and the redesigning the bus systems. That's 2. Third would be microtransit. Many systems are starting to, including LA Metro, with microtransit programs. Another one would be automated vehicle pilots, which we're starting to see happening around the country. Next would be integrated fare programs, where we're having not only pay for your transit ticket, but you can pay for other things along that through the web or mobile ticket. And fourth finally would be mobility as a service kind of programs, where you might have one-stop shopping for a multitude of trip planning or trip payment things. So anyway, I'll read them one more time because I'm thinking I'm probably missing something. And I'll ask you, or in fact the audience, what might they say, you know what, you're missing a very important thing here, or I don't think I have it all covered. I'll read them one more time and then sit down. 1 would be TNC partnerships. 2 would be reimagining bus route systems. 3 would be microtransit programs. 4th would be automated vehicle shuttles. Next, integrated fare programs and mobility as a service type one-stop shop programs. What am I missing? There's probably much more innovation than that. Here we go.
Jeff is going to let you know.
Hi, I think a 7th one would be, as we move into the world of connected vehicles and autonomous vehicles, how are you, as you're doing procurement, looking into the future of vehicle-to-vehicle and vehicle-to-infrastructure communication? And how are we reflecting that in our procurements of rolling stock, as the world is changing so fast that the vehicle you buy today will be outmoded 5 years from now or 6 years from now from a technology standpoint, given the innovation that's taking place to do real-time state of good repair on the vehicle, to do real-time communication with vehicle-to-vehicle, vehicle-to-infrastructure. So as we look in the upcoming authorization bill, how do we embrace that change and reflect that on our procurements, as well as our conversations with FTA, to embrace that change and allow that change to take place? Because we are in a rapidly changing environment where the world is changing under our feet. And to your point, Doug, we need to figure out how to respond to that change, because it's happening and we need to take advantage. So I would add the seventh, which is, in the world of connected vehicles, how do we make sure that our vehicles are part of that system to be able to connect to that world as we see connected vehicles appearing in more and more communities, and we begin to see that investment being made by city DOTs and state DOTs into those systems.
Okay, so I think that Art was trying to just knock everybody out with his laundry. I'm kidding, Art, I'm kidding. So I'm going to, having the perspective of two very different markets in the past couple of years, the first question I'd go with is, what is the point? And by that I mean is, what is the vision of what you're doing a gazillion years from now, 20 years from now, however far out the strategic thing is? What is your agency's mission to be the backbone for folks who don't have any other option? And there's probably 80% of our friends that we're talking to, that's what they are. Is your mission to be the incubator for sustainable land use, to come up with a walkable community? Like, what is the goal? And how does your plan to get there, and then build it back in from there? So is your goal to make sure every kid who goes to school in your urban districts can get home after an after-school activity, or is your job to connect commuters so you don't have to pay for parking downtown? I mean, you have a bunch of them, but where are you trying to go? And then how does the glitter get you there? Because AV is definitely very exciting. Connected vehicles, you can either, you can partner with Universal, like there's a bunch of things we can do, but what's the point of the glitter? Is it getting you to where you want to go? So last year, if you had asked me about this, at an agency that had overhauled because it was overhaul or shut the doors, right? That you had 1,100 square miles and absolutely not enough resources to cover it. There was a spirit of innovation because we didn't have enough money to not look at different things, and an extremely hardworking staff. But the goal was try out everything new and see what's successful and leverage that to try to get the coverage out there, And where I am now, it's, are we taking care of rolling stock that's 33 years old and we don't know when we're going to come back and replace it? Because, we're doing, in January we were 190,000 trips a day on bus. We're at 205,000 trips a day now. And there'll be 120 people on an RTIC on a Wednesday afternoon, and that's it's a different universe. So all the cool things we want to bring on are great, but is it in our lane? We don't have to do it all. We're never going to be the smart ones about AV, and I would say even with the most dynamic procurement process, we're going to tank if we try to engage with a lot of these private sector vendors. So do we have to be the one doing that, and can we be the partner? In Tampa, we weren't the partner a lot because we were broke, and it's what it was. And in Pittsburgh, we're not the partner because we have a very strong union climate, and adding in new flexible things just doesn't work with that. So what is the goal you're trying to get to? Figure that out, and then does that glitter make sense or not? Connected vehicles make a lot more sense for me than looking at ride share, and I'd say scooters, which I love because I don't ever have to deal with them. They're not regulated by the transit agency. There's no reason for us to get into that debate, but should we be going to the state capitol and argue that it should be treated like a bike, not a motorized device that requires a license and a helmet, So what are you trying to get to? Figure out if you should own it or not, and then if you shouldn't, how can you be the best possible partner? Because it's still taxpayer money. It's still money coming in from someone else that you can leverage to take that investment further. And I'll point to the Tampa Bay Fair project as a great example of, even agencies that weren't really huge being able to shoulder the heavy work to get 5 or 6 other counties that were never going to get on this program. And you have an innovation which is really helpful, and there's good data collection, but you can only focus on what you can do well. What's the goal? Is it worth the glitter?
Go ahead. I just want to mention, I think if we take the experience we have, the passion we have, what we can apply and do in our communities, and the great quality of life that we can provide. Understand we're all geographically different, but transit today has the greatest opportunity for change. We can make huge differences in our communities by reinventing what we do, by being innovative, and not use old models, but use new models. That's going to require legislative support. It's going to require some changes to allow us to get in that lane where we can really serve the people that need to be served and not divert dollars in other areas where they're spending money that we could do better things in transit. But in our community, and I guess for me, it's all about passion. You know, I recently had an interview with Flora Castillo for an hour, and it was a great hour. And she said to me, "You did all these things." You know, I said, "Well, you know, I've been on 22 committees in the community," and I told her all the committees I'm involved with. But I said, "I have a passion for this work. I have a passion for our community." I think we all do. But I think we have an opportunity today. If we harness change, we can be the leader. We can make the difference in our community. We can turn this thing around. In our community, we were down 11% on our fixed routes. We're up 7% now. Our regional routes are up 60%. Our medical services are up 77%. And we're seeing it because we're providing a model that better addresses the needs of the community. I know we're a small entity compared to big systems and big areas, but I think if we use our passion and our experience and willingness to change and be the innovator, I think that we can create a great quality of life in our communities, and it's going to require many partners to help us. And that starts right with our legislature.
I might take a slightly different angle here. I think I think this is why the importance why each transit authority needs a business plan, where it's going to spend its time and where it's going to win. I think we have to not try and be all things to all people and all topics. The private sector does it. The private sector says, I'm going to focus on these markets, and I'm not going to go play in all these markets. So, but I do think harnessing each of us leads at different times. And each agency, my experience in this sort of 20 years, is that different agencies have different core competencies that we can each learn from each other. But it doesn't mean we each have to have somebody at every single table on every topic all the time, because we all, like APTA, have a capacity issue, a human capacity issue. So you have to pick where you're going to win and where you're going to lead, and then where you're going to draft behind maybe others in the industry who can actually help you. I'm Canadian, so it's like the Canada geese. Everybody gets to turn to take the lead when you fly, right? And so I believe the power is actually in our independent agencies. And if I was in the APTA strategy group, I'd be going, what is the parts we need to compete? And who are the pods of people in each agencies who're signing up to be the leads on those groups to help all of us and share, and the other ones can absorb it as best they can or the desire based on that time. If we look at the rail car procurement issue, that's a really important issue. I'm working right now on driverless train technology in mixed traffic. I came from Vancouver, BC. It's the world's largest driverless train system. So it's not new. The only thing missing is mixed traffic. That's the only thing missing. It's all done, right? And we'll draft behind the automotive industry. So others in the industry are already doing this stuff overseas right now. There's a streetcar right now that's driverless right now in Germany, as some of you know. So it doesn't mean everybody has to do it, but maybe that's an area we can try and help advance the team's advance. So I don't think trying to take the list on and go, how am I going to do this? I'll use an example when I was at Starbucks Coffee. We consciously, this is many years ago now, we consciously made a decision. We were not going to invest in technology change for 5 full years. We were so focused on global expansion. Can't do it. You have to pick what you're not going to do and de-emphasize as an entity within your capacities versus also what you are going to do. And a bit of a page out of Blue Oceans, if anyone's ever read that, it's what are you going to win at? So we chose in our agency, what are we going to win at in Portland, Oregon? We picked the winners, the ones we're going to focus on. Some things we're going to go, I want to do it, interesting, but can't do it all because we all have a capacity issue. So I think leveraging the partnerships from others, I think is going to be really important. Then you absorb it as you can when you choose to. But at the APTA level of strategy, that is an association level of strategy. So I'd relate that differently than I would at the transit authority level, because you're integrating all policies and direction. They're managing the execution of product in addition to policy, where policy meets implementation. So I think it'd be a very different discussion. You don't have to be the doer of it, just leverage the other groups. Would be my input to you.
And Jeff, I think I'm going to regret this, but I'm all in for that conversation. Let's figure it out. Because if we don't, no one else is going to, right? Yes.
Yeah, Rick Simonetta. You're all transit managers working in a very dynamic time, trying to deal with the evolution of, what's happening around us and the fast-growing change. It's one thing to work with the agency staff, from the drivers and mechanics through the management ranks, to try to create alignment on how you have to deal with the dynamics of today. But you also report to policy boards. And are there any particular challenges related to involving the policy boards in the appropriate manner? Are there any, clever opportunities that you have found that really work that you might want to share with us?
I don't know that this is clever at all, but I think that the education piece and making sure that the policy board or elected officials, sometimes you have sort of many bosses in your role, is important. And so I like the idea of like doing kind of deeper dives with your board so that they understand what's going on, helping them see what's going on in other places in the US or even other places in the world. And I think trying to do a heads up so that they're not taken by surprise. I mean, I think that's probably one of the worst things. Sometimes you can't control it. Sometimes things happen and nobody knew. But I think the more you can do to help them see what's coming down the line or understand what's going to happen. I don't know if that's clever, but at least that's something to do.
Anyone else?
Our board, in dealing with our board, to answer your question, we brought our board along so that they support the changes that we're making. But I want to point this out, that just as what Doug had mentioned here, we pick winners. We want to make sure that if we're going to go out and provide new services, we're going to have partners that are willing to pay for those services and they'll be sustainable, because the pot of money we have is not increasing. And we need to find ways to do more, but have partners willing to pay for it. Our board has been extremely supportive of that. They understand that. And we try to create a business model that 50% of our business will be supported by outside partnerships. Our fare recovery today is over 60%, so it's very high and growing. And so our board appreciates that and understands that we're only going to do it where it makes a business model sense.
Just add it, Coda, probably about a year ago now, we reorganized our board committee structure. So we had a committee for every division, an IT committee, an HR committee. I'm sure that made sense at one time. What had happened was board members, if you would meet once a month on HR, you can imagine, what topics are you going to talk about? You're originally up here where a board should be, and suddenly you're down in the weeds. So we did a retreat with staff and the board, and the board was actually like, please reduce the number of these committees and meetings. And so we did, down to 3. And the change has, it was hard to adjust because you initially think like, how are we going to get a resolution through? But I would tell you, quickly what happened was the conversations and the engagement of the board did rise up to this level. And we did some kind of dramatic changes that were unnerving and uncomfortable for staff and some of the board. We don't have a finance committee anymore. That's in strategic planning and operations. And the CFO doesn't get to lead that committee as a staff person. It's actually the chief of development. And so, that's unnerving. But guess what? We have a conversation about a budget that is really supposed to be about policy, vision, direction. It's not supposed to actually be down into just decimal points and numbers and cents, dollars and cents. And so, again, it was a tough change to adapt, but it quickly produced the results that we needed, where we have a board now that is, they have a structure that allows them to be more bold. We also now have a structure where prior to coming to board meetings, they would try to address kind of some big issues because they were so spread thin through all these committees. We've already kind of vetted the tough questions and issues in these 3 committees, and we come to the board and there's a lot more of appropriate conversation at that level.
Well, she sort of just answered, and sometimes if you wait long enough, the answer will come out. But my question was, what can we do to better, as a board, governance? You know, learned yesterday you need to have, a heart of a charity and a mind of a business in order to survive this transit change, if you will. So my question is, what can we do as boards or policy making without killing everybody with all the committees, but making policies lenient or not so restrictive that gives the business the ability to make these changes without coming to the board and having to change articles of operation or policies or whatnot. So any ideas on what you guys have done to make that change, to allow for changes to occur faster, to keep up?
Well, presuming you're starting from a place where you trust your CEO, right? Not that, because there are some places that do not have that, right? If you're coming from that place and you trust your CEO and your senior staff, let them work with you and trust them when they tell you that something might be onerous or not. So we just concluded an audit. We have an auditor general in Pennsylvania, and one of the recommendations from our audit was to go to our board with hiring policies and have that be a board-approved document. And uniformly, the board just was like clutch the pearls. They were thinking, oh my God, every time there's going to be a change to drug testing, there's going to be, the tax law has now changed the actual value of reimbursement. And they were thinking, we don't want to touch all of this, we want to stay away. So when they said, what's your recommendation, we were able to say, respectfully, we'll go wherever you want to go, but can we focus you on X, Y, Z? So if you trust your staff and you have a good understanding there, you can work with them to say, hey, how much oversight is too much? I would say most agencies with which I'm familiar, you might do a big overhaul or an overhaul to policy every 3 to 5 years. And so if you're touching your policies more, like if you're touching them annually, and it could be something really, really big. You could have just gotten $120 million more annually that you spend. That's kind of a big deal. But if it's your hiring policy, your procurement, if you're doing those annually, you are taking time where you guys could be big picture and you're not investing it where you need to be, because it's these little nitnoid things that you're approving instead of guiding. I'd say something for me as a CEO, if board members will get out there and get to events or be at places where our riders are, that is hugely impactful. Not just for my senior staff, that they see that our board members are engaged and want to be there. It's extremely important to your patrons that they see board members and they can interact with you. And the difference between board members, it's not like you're always there, but if you can do 2, 3 things maybe in a year, maybe go to an operating facility, come out to a company picnic, whatever, what you will understand about your organization and the values and how the community sees you, it will fundamentally improve that focus on what you're doing when you're there, why your wisdom and judgment is important in your community. So trust your folks and make sure that your face is seen so folks know who you are. Violate policy. Yeah. Now that's a very interesting conversation. Just kidding. What are you worried about? Tell me more. Yeah.
CEO to do what's needed to be dynamic and make these changes, but we don't want to come back and say, well, I guess we need to make that policy violate.
Well, if you have a good executive office, it's going to let you know that. But I mean, maybe there's board members out there who've been able to go through this whole thing going crazy out here in transit that might have some insight?
So I might just provide a couple comments on. The first one is, I'm on boards too. I'm also CEO, so you get to play different hats in different industries, right? And so management, I guess I always looked, whether it be private sector or public, who owns strategy? The board or management? So for me, management should own strategy for the company. The board has to endorse it, but management should drive it and own it. So I look at the strategic piece, and then I also look at the fiduciary risk piece that the board has. So it may get to those concerns you have. So don't ever let those go. So it's, there's a reason for audits being done, whether it be safety or financial or whatever. So you still need those to be done as part of the regular duties of a board. But at some point, for example, I'm introducing in our agency, literally next month, our first corporate risk registry. We have risk registries for capital projects, but we never had a corporate one. So we're going to try and also get what are the risks and where are they identified and who owns them at what levels of the organization. That's the most important thing for me. It's not that I'm not going to look for a board member to figure out why a train wheel fell off, but the right person better know how to do that, and are the checks and balances there. So overseeing the right corporate balance on risk is one thing. Then I personally look to management, if I was on a board, to say, help me, how can I support you, management, on your strategy? Inside strategy would be things like innovation that we've talked about today, things like the health checks, if you will, of employee engagement, safety, innovation. You go down your ability, what's your ask versus spend on capital, like how much capital are you asking for, how much you're really getting out the door here, and how much you're tying up on our behalf, those types of things. So, but let management own, I would suggest, the strategy piece. But help management be accountable to strategy, but also develop that it's a robust strategy that includes the things that you, as a policy oversight group, need to represent without the doing. If you get to implementation, you got to go time out. That's management's job. So the other point I think Catherine raised, and I would sure double down on that, is the more a board member can be out in the community helping as eyes and ears. Catherine can't be everywhere. This team can't be everywhere. Neither can I. So the more advocates, and I'll call listening posts, that we can have out there to say, hey, by the way, heads up, this is just so you're aware, or little things to big things. It takes a village to run these complex systems, and so a board member has a really important role. But just be careful not to make a commitment that may have unintended consequences.
Sure. Marlene Connor with Marlene Connor Associates. Given that there are a number of different solutions and that every solution is going to be different for each agency based on politics and resources and staffing and capacity, how then does that information of the experiences and practices that you all have done get collated and communicated such that it can be a benefit either to agencies that are looking to try new things or to benefit the industry as we look to restructure the program or try to communicate the benefits and values of what we're doing? How do we make that leap from a lot of different pieces to something that's beneficial to the industry as a whole?
I'll start. I think that's an excellent question, and it was sort of as we were talking and somebody brought up the integrated fare payment, what I wanted to say, and I know this will be super controversial, especially if you've got 60% fare, but what if the most innovative thing the industry could do is say, we're not collecting fares anymore. It's free to ride on transit service. And I know that's super, please don't quote me in the newspaper on that. But that would be innovation and that would be a disruption, certainly. But I would also throw out there that maybe part of what we need to do as an industry is be a little bit more like each other, so that if you go to a different city, it is easier to use the transit system. I mean, I have traveled a bunch and go to different cities, and it's not always as accessible from a visitor standpoint as I'd like it to be. Now, I don't mean that everybody has the same logo or that we all have the same fare card. I mean, I'm not sure what the solution is, but I do think that if you look to the success of the interstate highway system, it's one look, it's one brand. They said, we're going to build highways all over the country that can operate. I think there's something to be learned from that as an industry. So I would just throw that out there as, I don't know exactly how to share that information, but I think if we could do more to be even just a little bit more similar, a little bit more user-friendly for everybody, it might be helpful.
Marlene, I think it's a really good question coming back to how to share the information, because the point in my career when I would have been able to sit down and read through stuff, like right when I was a brand new planner and my boss said, here's the UMTA manual, don't get me sued, right? I don't know how effective that is for carrying some of this information back and forth, but to broadly and badly paraphrase Churchill, like maybe reports are the worst way to share information except for every other way. So, I mean, maybe it's podcasts or webinars or phone calls. I don't know. I've been doing a lot this year is grabbing cards from folks I know at APTA, so like Bill McLeod, and I've connected him with folks on my staff, like you need to ask so-and-so about something. But yeah, that is a good question. How do you share that information so we're learning, but like in a good way? And now more broadly, we're all different, but I mean, what's our core mission? It's getting folks around, and whether you are an economic engine, I mean, we have that in common of what is the core thing that we're all doing? What are the goals that we're trying to hit? And I'm repeating my previous answer, but I think it comes back to what is it we're trying to achieve? What are the best ways to get there? And it will be different, but I mean, everyone ate something different for Thanksgiving dinner, but probably everyone was in a food coma last Thursday. So it can be as easy or as difficult as we make it.
I think there's 2 points for me that were made here. The first one is the degree that this industry can standardize will be to its benefit, because we are looking at other cost structure alternatives in the marketplace that aren't just a train or a bus anymore. So there is a backroom advantage to synergizing and centralizing standards and or practices where we can. I very much agree. In fact, it reminded me, I don't know if anyone remember you going up to get your first cup of coffee at Starbucks or wherever you get it. Decaf, no, what the heck is that? I just want a cup of coffee. There's a language, and it's a barrier, and you're going, oh my gosh, like a ticket vending machine, I'm getting nervous, my time's coming up, and I don't know, I'm in Washington, and I'm supposed to know this industry, but I don't. How's it all work? And so there's a barrier to entry for our new customers that we don't talk about, that I really agree with standardization where we can, to help as people travel more than ever in our history around the world. So the more we can standardize basic things, that is going to be to everybody's advantage. Now, not everything is going to be unique, because we live in unique places that have unique boards and policies and cultures. That's okay. But the more we can do that, that's going to be to our benefit. So it also increases our buying power, increases our standardization, our knowledge, and a whole bunch of cost tail things come with it. Having said that, on the other end of the spectrum, to your question, it's a bit like the wine industry. There's a lot of spillage of knowledge that doesn't get picked up. We meet at great places like this and others to share knowledge, just like conversations. And I think it's going to be a combination of podcasts and that we're going to have to learn to share. Our worlds are faster than ever before. And so we're in a high volume business now of life in these kinds of leadership roles that we all have. And so we may have to pick which ones we want to focus on, which ones are really core to win on and which ones aren't. I'm a big believer in triaging, because if we're take it all on and let's just have a sort of big kumbaya that we're all going to do, I just don't think it's real. I think if we say, boy, we need to really commit on this, the industry, part of our strategy is to which ones do we want to communicate and share that the industry has got to get right. I think that one might be of interest. The second one goes, nice to know, because maybe I know you, you know me. There's that secondary benefit relationships. You never want to limit those things. Those are wonderful things. But maybe we want to pick some core ones saying, let's get really good at these ones. Let's win.
So I have two follow-up thoughts. One is, how do we communicate that information to our younger staff, the incoming people, so that this the innovation continues? And then the other follow-up is, how does the success of what it is that we're doing get translated to, say, the NTD, so that we can compare what we're doing in a way that is scalable, logical, transferable, works back and forth, communicating with our funding sources somehow. Just a thought.
Way to shut it down, Marlene.
Come on, NTD is really fun.
I know, it's exciting.
I
I like this concept on barrier to entry. I think you can do that across all of the modes, whether it's new staffers coming in to figure it out, whether it's new board members. I would say a lot of board members spend 3 years before they really know everything going on that they need to. There's a big learning curve. But to have another controversial opinion, let us not conflate like barriers to entry with doing the same things all around the country. I mean, listen, my core market, and it's just who we have, my core market is might be using public transportation throughout the region, might be going to Cleveland or somewhere in the Midwest. My core market is not using the same There is not a desire to have an app that they can use in Pittsburgh, that they can use in Miami, that they can go somewhere else. There is a market of some of our transportation folks like that. Probably a heavy overlap with our rail passengers, but making it easier for folks because of a barrier to entry, let's not confuse that with helping the folks being the same all around the country, because I don't, and maybe everybody else's market is different, but I don't see that if what we're trying to do is make it easiest for tourists, we're hitting the core thing. But if making it easier for tourists is removing the same barrier to entry, you've accomplished the same thing. It's very universal design. And barrier to entry for somebody who's new to the industry, what are these acronyms and why are you talking about NTD and oh my God, what is an unlinked passenger trip? Yeah, and are you crushing that person's soul and then they leave the agency before you get anything good out of them? That's a really good point.
I
Just comment on, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think with ridership going down and systems cutting service, increase in fares, the initiative that APTA has embraced with mobility can be a great asset to us. And we can use that to take our best practices and put them into a storage or at least archive those. So those systems out there that may be anticipating increasing fares, cutting service, may look at other ways to deal with some of the issues. It may not work for every system, but by size, there may be some best practices that could be extremely helpful. And so I think at least we have the mobility management section now that's so important to our industry, and we could use that as an archive for others to look in, see if there's something you can use.
Just had two comments. One was on the board one. I became the CEO in Portland, took over. It was very evident, and Catherine raised this, the learning curve for a board member is really significant, particularly if you weren't a follower of transit before you got appointed. In fact, it's unfair. And all of a sudden you got a microphone in your face and, hey, how do you feel about all the policies on X, Y, and Z, right? Is that fair? Yeah, and so it's overwhelming. So one of the things we've done is actually started a board member to board member mentoring program. The experienced board members help the new ones. Management's not in the room. Let your hair down, talk about each other, help each other through it so you don't have the cameras on while you're trying to learn, and also tie up the board meetings while you're asking those questions. So it helps everyone. So that's something we just implemented recently, and we'll see how it goes. But I think so far so good. It just starts off as a coffee, then you kind of work from there, work your topics. So I think so far it's been good. But I do believe, though, on this, if those who have not implemented smart cards, network smart card, those who are coming, I think where APTA can help us. We need, as an industry, to get ahead of what we haven't spent and say this are the areas because we're all replacing rail cars, we're all replacing buses, we're all replacing stuff of state of good repair, and there's this giant legacy gazillion-dollar programs going on. What are those ones, and maybe mobility might be that piece, what are the standards of the future? Sony versus Beta, if you want to go back in time. Like, which is it we're going to go with? So not the one that has, because we haven't made these big, long procurement cycles that we can get ahead of this to say, this is where we want to play. We're not there yet, but it's going to be coming. And so we can get to the standardization. If it is smart cards, I've got a whole top drawer of the Octopus card and the Charlie card. And everybody got them, right? That's nuts. That we should be having one industry card eventually over the years ahead. This is not a 5-year thing. This is 20 years out. But let's set our standards that we will get 20 years out. I think the agency owes it to itself because it's going to be here for 150 years, 200 years. So let's not play on 1, 3, and 5-year games. Let's get way out there and say, we're all going to get there as your state of good repair on these topics. This is what it's going to look like. Other industries have gone before us. The airline industry has gone to standardization. Other industries have as well on key components. So the ones we can that benefit our customer. So if we follow the customer, we will win. And we'll take on those other markets whatever they are. The new ones come, the airplane ones that are coming for commuters. But let's get ahead of ourselves to take advantage of the great power of this industry that it actually has. I think we're so busy surviving on state of good repair. And what's the next renewal of the legislator looking like? We haven't got far enough out.
Mm-hmm. This is a personal question. A personal interest of mine is electrification. I think that's another one that Art can add to his buckets. But I think maybe from a transit perspective, it's a different fuel source. But from a rider perspective, I think it's more of a pollution issue. So when I'm riding a bike downtown and I get stuck next to a bus, there's fumes in my face, or even waiting at the transit center. So I'm interested to hear kind of your opinion on the electrification of buses going forward.
I think it's both. I think it's fuel cost. I mean, from our agency, as I mentioned sort of in the beginning, it was more of a financial decision, looking at a way to stabilize fuel cost. There was certainly benefit, and our customers and the community have seen it more from an air quality and emission standpoint. So I think it's a little bit of both, but I think the point about standardization that you just made is very relevant towards electrification, because depending on which OEM you go, bus manufacturer, there are differences in the charging, there overnight fast charge, different types. There's not like a USB per se for electric buses. So I think that is, part and parcel to what he's saying, is that standardization is important. But I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, sustainability is kind of both financial and, environment. So my view. So others.
I think I would offer, don't count out hydrogen yet.
Kurt's here.
We've committed our agency by 2040 or before, we will have our 900 buses basically by then converted over. But we did, because I think the technology is still not in a stabilized environment yet, still unsettled waters, including training programs, all those things. But we'll get there. I think, as I said to our board, I said, let's pick strategy, let management sort out the tactics. And we even have a funding gap for 2040. We said, let management solve that. We will manage it. But if we don't, then we'll have a tendency just to push it off. So I said, let's not let ourselves off the hook easy here. So we're in for 100 buses right now that are rolling out electric. And I said in 5 years, I believe the trajectory of cost needs to come down, the stabilization of the battery technologies, et cetera. The bigger piece is not just the bus, it's the infrastructure cost. It's the changeover piece without getting caught in shifting technologies of Beta versus Sony, right? But he said in 5 years, we're going to do a strategic review. Where is the industry? Where are we before we start putting the flag in the ground? So we think 5 years out is about the right time. And we'll have some of our own experience of a few different types of electric buses. So to me, let's focus on strategy is what our agency is going to do, not the tactics, and management will manage to get to that distillate-free alternative. And I know I was talking to a fellow I used to work with at Shell. He's in charge of hydrogen globally for Shell. And they're building in Long Beach right now. When we think of transit as a big industry, in the oil industry, which I used to work, they have what's called distribution channels. And they're dealing with the CEO of Maersk and others, like way bigger than us. And so we're just one strand on, if you look at the ocean sideways for them. And so they're looking at the hydrogen highway on the West Coast right now. Long Beach, where the big port is one of the key ones. So we're trying to position ourselves. Can we be your transit partner next to our transit facility right off the highway, a piece of property we just bought for a new bus facility? Could we be your hydrogen highway partner for truck fleets and everyone else, and we'll just be the one for transit? So we're trying to say, do we play in the hydrogen space as well?
Any other questions?
Hi, good afternoon. Melanie Williams from Hillsborough County with Heart. I love diversity of the conversation and the aspects that you come from and the history you bring to the conversation that's being held today. I'm just curious. I just started on the board in May of 2018, and so I'm here because I want to learn as much as possible so I can contribute and add value to each and every person that is viable to utilize the transportation system. But from my perspective, you all come at it from different perspectives, and I think the gentleman came up and said there were 6 or 7 different options or initiatives that are potential for us. And the simple question I have for you is, what is your measure of success based on what you're doing today? Maybe that will give me some insight, some things I can take back and look at how we should focus our efforts and and make sure we do a quality job versus so many things across the board. So if you could answer that for me, please, I'd appreciate that.
I think if we could answer it, we'd all be best-selling authors
Right.
and not sitting here. Well, so you've got a scorecard that can help you level stuff out, because that's the thing. Is ridership your metric? if ridership's your metric, make everything free, and you'll have crazy ridership, but you'll lose a quarter of your budget, and you'll never be on time. So maybe being on time is your metric, so just keep the door shut, right? Maybe being accident-free is your metric, and then just go really slowly and never turn, right? So I think it's less of an individual metric, but what is your blended system, what is your blend that you are looking at? And boards can be very impactful in setting those. So if your particular interest is looking at environmental issues or sustainability, how are you making sure that's included from a board member perspective, you're getting briefed on that or not? Me individually, I'm a planner, so I always look at ridership, I always look at capacity per trip, I look at how we're doing up and down. To the extent that I have satisfaction measures, I look at that as well. But the reality in transit is we can look really great to board members, and you can have a CEO who has a wonderful dossier of everything he or she did in the last year with beautiful pictures, and it's a crap service out on the street. Or you can have a service that is absolutely fantastic for your patrons, and you have decision makers who don't, the disconnect is there and they don't see the value for it. So I think a place what might be very helpful for board members is making sure that you are delivering a service which is really great and it looks really great on paper. I don't know if that makes any sense or not.
It does make sense, and just, I think you're saying from an internal perspective, here are the key factual measurements that I measure myself against and how we ensure we utilize our funds appropriately. And then from an external standpoint, we want to make sure that it is fluid and they see the benefit of what we are saying we're doing, or either there's a linkage or a match. So it's,
yes.
Okay.
So do you have, are you doing what your community values you to do?
Right.
So however you're going to measure that, if you have a community assessment, if it's
Right.
that the new mayor says, I love you and sprinkles cash all over you, whatever that is, I think there's a lot of value in saying, how do we make sure that we're lining up with what our various communities want and we're delivering in a way that they see value? Because every transit agency, regardless of all the other stuff we've talked about, is exactly the same in this sense that we don't own the service. The community owns the service, your agency runs it. So how are you lining those up? I think that's, there's a lot of value in making sure that you're hitting that.
Thank you.
And your community might not care so much about fare recovery. They might care, are you running at 3 in the morning? So that's a wonderful touch point.
I might take a stab at it. I know about 3 years ago, this industry had a profound thump that came along with it, Uber and Lyft and all these other systems, because before that, we were out there just operating. We were talking about grow this, grow that, build this, build that. All of a sudden, these new services came online. And I think it's extremely important as a public agency to approach our business today with a private sector attitude. Because that legislature that we're dealing with, they're more expecting today than ever before that we do that. And I think to the degree we can demonstrate that, and we can demonstrate that we are viable, but we're doing it in a sustainable manner, and we can take that forward, it helps us. And so, yes, numbers are important, exceeding expectations, but when it really comes down to it, I think we must have a great business model, and it's a different model than we've had in the past. It's very different. And if we use that attitude, we can do more. It'll change in different areas, but we can do more because we're embracing a different methodology. And we're being innovative at the same time. So I don't know if that helps you.
I would offer that it's important for the transit agency to understand the culture of the government, the senior government above it. And each state has a different culture of what it expects from its transit agency, transportation authority, legislatively, because we're often product of legislation. And so the KPIs, the performance indicators, I think will follow as you take the legislative mandate and translate into the vision, mission, and values. I think we talked about this morning. Those vision, mission, values some of them are up for grabs now because of things like the word mobility, multimodal mobilities that didn't used to be there. And just by that change alone may alter the metrics you've actually been relying on for the past 50, 100 years. So we have had we've not had a business plan, so I just introduced a business plan with actual 5-year forward-looking KPIs, hard ones, that people are kind of uncomfortable with, but the private sector does it every day. You can't get a bank loan without them, right? And so we're doing that. We're in year 3 now of that. But we may have to shape them a bit as we're trying to change our agency to more of a multimodal agency, an integrator, not just a provider of paratransit, rail, and bus. So some of those KPIs may be up for grabs again, based on strategy, I think from a board governance perspective. I'd be careful not to get into the weeds. But as a board member, part of your role is to mitigate risk. And as all the spokes of your responsibility, one thing, ask Union Carbide how it's going. Bhopal, India, many years ago, it blew up because one person in Bhopal, India blew up the place and the whole company got wiped off the map. So you want to make sure the right practices are in place. So that risk side, I think, is really crucial, regardless of what the mandate is, but have the right KPIs that give you the checks and balances on the diagnostic risk and health of the agency underneath the vision, mission, and values.
And I think you can't emphasize enough listening to the community and really understanding what they're looking for, which has already been set up here. But just in a year and a half I've been at CODA, start out, it's all about fair recovery. And so we were coming up on we need to increase our fares because fair recovery. And then all of a sudden the community said, no, a priority of our community is the fact that while we're having great success in the Columbus region, we have an unacceptable poverty rate. I mean, we believe that transit plays a role in solving that issue. And so the community was absolutely against increasing fares. So that made, the board step back and was like, well, is that still a goal and a priority of ours? And where does that, what changes? What are, and what's moving and shifting? And since that time, what I've seen is the board really expecting to see the CODA team and the CODA employees be engaged in efforts that are increasing our accessibility for more residents, getting them to more jobs, getting them to doctor's appointments and schools. So, increase your involvement in Smart Columbus and use innovation. Keep the fares down. And we've actually have had a very prominent business person come to us and say, remove fares altogether. And we've had to sit down and have that conversation. So, that really kind of quickly turned around, and we still feel that there is not a community-wide support to increase fares. What else can you do? So, again, just listening to the community is so important.
I just have one thing, and I don't know if it's a specific indicator for an agency, or it's not, but I think it's important. I was pleasantly surprised, or I assumed that Amazon would locate in a city that had a well-built, extensive transit system. My husband is an urban planner, as I am, and we had a bet. We had a bet over which city. Well, we are nerds, but we had a bet on that. So when they picked New York and DC and sort of split those, I felt like this is a sign that this is different than when I started in transit, and it was like, well, maybe Houston is going to build light rail. Maybe LA will do something more with transit. Like, we've done a lot in the past 20 years, 20, 25 years, that I think is an important success story, something that we should say more, talk more about. But I think some of it is that coverage and how extensively your transit system gets into the area you serve. So maybe not a KPI, but I think that's an important piece of what we do as well.
So we have only a few minutes left, so I just want to give the panelists a chance to say any last-minute words if you have to the audience before we close off the session. Anyone? All right, well, can you please all join me in giving the panelists a round of applause?